A short story about dignity and death. In the bustling streets of Pompeji, a city full of color, wealth and poverty, noise and laughter, work and sex, Cassius worked as a slave in the house of the senator Lucius. Cassius' days were hard and his nights short. As he did every morning, Cassius and his friend Marcus, his master's son, searched for obsidian, which they turned into arrowheads for the soldiers of Pompeji. Even as children, the two of them were on the lookout for this glassy rock, which is only found near active volcanoes. As the two grew older, they began to work the rock and mold the sharp edges into perfect arrowheads. Marcus sold the points and had long since made a name for himself among the soldiers. He secretly shared the profits with Cassius, as slaves were not allowed to own anything. Even as a child he had promised his friend Cassius that he would let him go free on the day he inherited his father. Marcus and Cassius were friends, but what caused Cassius the greatest grief was the unrequited longing he felt for Marcus, his master's son. Marcus was clever and kind-hearted, a son in Cassius' dark world, and yet unattainable. Cassius was skillful, strong, and creative when it came to working obsidian and pumice. One morning, when the city was awakening and the first rays of sunlight were climbing over the walls, the two friends were out again on the slopes of Mount Vesuvius, when suddenly all the birds startled and flew off, making a loud noise. The earth shook slightly, barely noticeably, but enough to give Cassius and Marcus pause. "Look," said Cassius, pointing to a streaming vapor crawling out of the ground about 100 meters away. It wasn't the first fumarole they have seen. Over the last few weeks, gases had been regularly released from the magma chamber. The sulfur dioxide stank terribly. "The volcano is farting again," said Marcus. "Enough for today. Let's go back." When they arrived back in the city, the earth shook again, deeper, more vicious, with a loud rumble. A loud murmur went through the city as people stopped and stared up at Vesuvius towering above them. A cloud of black smoke began to rise, powerful and menacing. That was new. "What's happening?" asked Marcus, who was standing next to Cassius on the terrace of the house. His voice was full of concern, his eyes wide open. "The mountain," muttered Cassius, unable to avert his gaze. "It's waking up." As the earth shook again and several dilapidated buildings collapsed, chaos erupted within moments. People ran through the streets, calling for their families and trying to escape. Cassius and Marcus were alone at home. The whole family, including the slaves, had gone to the coast to buy fish. The two teenagers were supposed to look after the house. They could see huge rocks thundering down into the valley from the mountain top when, with a huge bang, an unexpectedly explosive eruption hurled the entire mountain top away with an infernal noise. At the same time, enormous quantities of glowing lava were hurled into the clouds. Within seconds, lumps of rocks tumbled from the sky, smashing through roofs and killing the first people before they even realized what was happening. Cassius felt the fear rising with him. He knew there was nowhere they could flee to, no escape from the violence of the mountain. He grabbed Marcus' arm and pulled him towards the gates. "We have to get out of here." But as they fought their way through the panicked masses, the escape became increasingly hopeless. Stones, glowing wisps of magma and ash began to fall from the sky. The air became heavy and poisonous, and the cries of the desperate filled the city. Marcus grabbed Cassius by the arm. "Get back into the house, into the cellar where the coal and wood for our bathing room are stored. It's safe because it only has one door that we can close." A huge explosion shook Mount Vesuvius and a wave of hot gas and ash rushed down the slope towards Pompeji. The two friends had just made it into the house. Quick-witted, they ran through the kitchen, grabbing food and a carafe of wine. Cassius and Marcus stumbled, coughing, their eyes watering from the gas and ash. "There's no escape," Marcus gasped, his voice full of anger and frustration. "We are doomed." He slammed the door shut behind him, locking it and stuffing straw into the cracks of the rough wood. Cassius' own fear turned to anger. Anger at the mountain, at the gods, who could be so cruel, at the fate that left them no way out. "Why?" he shouted into the darkness of the cellar. "Why do we have to die like this?" The heat was unbearable, and the roar of the mountain and the screams of the people were deafening. In a desperate search for shelter, they retreated to a small alcove in the wall at the other end of the cellar. Marcus banged his fist against the wall, his eyes full of tears. "It's not fair. I don't want to die. Not like this." Cassius looked at him, saw the tears and the anger and the despair. And in that moment he realized something, a deep truth that took his breath away, despite his fear of death. "Marcus," he said quietly, his voice trembling, "maybe it's not about how we die, but about how we live these last moments." Marcus looked at him, his eyes widening. "You mean we shouldn't fight?" "I mean we shouldn't let fear and anger rule us," Cassius said. His voice sounded unusually calm now. "There are things we can't change, but we can decide how we face them. We've done that all our lives. I as a born slave, you as my master. Nevertheless, we became friends." A moment of silence fell, a strange peace in the midst of the raging chaos. Marcus took a deep breath and let the tears run down his face without wiping them away. "You are right, Cassius. There's no point in fighting the inevitable." They sat down next to each other in the alcove, leaning against the wall and looking up the ceiling as the earth shook again and dirt fell through the wooden floorboards. It was getting incredibly hot. Breathing was becoming increasingly difficult, and it smelled of burning wood. Cassius put a hand on Marcus' shoulder, and Marcus took it, holding it tightly. "If these are our last moments," Marcus said, his voice now calm and clear, "then I want to experience them without regret, without fear, just in the present, in what is now." Cassius nodded, a sense of peaceful acceptance filling his heart. "Together, Marcus, until the end." And so they sat there hand in hand as the ashes thickened and the world around them sank into darkness. They felt the heat of the inferno raging above them, heard the endless thunder of Vesuvius, but they remained calm, knowing that they have not feared the inevitable. They had lived through the anger, fear, and despair, and had found the strength to face the end with open hearts. Centuries later, when the city was discovered under a layer of ash and time, archaeologists found their remains huddled in the corner of the house, their hands still intertwined. Two people in death, bearing witness to the courage to face the unknown, to the power of finding peace in the last breath of life. And so the story of Cassius and Marcus became a quiet whisper through the centuries, a reminder that in the face of the inevitable, it is not anger or despair that counts, but the courage to accept it with dignity.